On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcaster.
And I'm Katherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing. Welcome back to Stop the Killing. This is part 2 on our series on understanding the deadly force policy within law enforcement. With our amazing guest, we're so privileged to have Jerri Williams, retired FBI agent and the host of the FBI Retired Case File Review podcast, with us on both episodes. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go back and start there. It is episode 58, Understanding Deadly Force. You'll find it in the Stop the Killing podcast feed. So today we're picking up where we left off, exploring the aftermath of these critical moments and the impact that it has on the officers, and why it's so important that they actually have access to counselling and psychiatric services so they can continue to do their job. I also just wanted to give a huge thank you to Jerri because she's brought along 3 more clips from her podcast. And as we delve deeper, I just want to pose this question to you listeners. If you aren't law enforcement like myself, I want to ask the same question to you that Jerri asked me in the last episode. Could you be in a role where one day you may have to take a life?
You know, one of the reasons why it's so important that law enforcement go through counseling and when they're involved in a shoot is because they're going back out on the street and they're going to have to decide whether to pull their gun again, decide whether to not pull their gun. They might fear being involved in another firefight. And if they aren't capable of doing that, they're with a gun around civilians who think they're protected, but they're not. Right? I mean, you have to have a law enforcement officer in the right frame of mind, is what I'm saying. And
or
so
a law enforcement partner who's thinking they've got the, they've got their back. Yeah.
Right. I'm out with you, but I just was involved in a shoot a couple of years ago, and I don't think I'm ever going to pull my trigger again. And Jerri and I are out on a surveillance and something bad happens, and I can't protect my partner because of these issues that I never dealt with from 2 years ago. That's a very serious, a reality. And I think also the reality of you've got a clip from somebody who was shot and what it's like to be shot.
Mm.
Yeah,
those
are
are the ones that are the most powerful, because I'm going to admit to something, and I don't know if this is your case, but I always had that dream while I was in the FBI. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a dream that I was in a situation and I had to shoot someone or I was in a firefight. And sometimes the dream worked out well. Sometimes the dream did not work out well. But it was a dream that was reoccurring, that I could say that in a sense, it was almost like part of training, because your mind was helping you go through what you might do, how you might react. And to hear these guys actually talk about being in that real life situation was, I'm listening to them as we're recording the interview, and I think it affects other law enforcement officers hearing these stories probably more than it does the general public, because you're still listening to it as a TV show or a movie. It's hitting us as real life or something that we've, if not in actuality, been through, something that we've been through mentally many, many times.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're shaking your head, because I didn't want to
fascinating.
know if I was.
Yeah, I know that's fascinating to hear you say, because the same thing, right? I mean, I would think I must be a little kooky to be dreaming about being in shootings. But I love that you say it's part of, I think it is, now that I think about it. I think the way you say that, absolutely, that's part of training, the idea of being prepared all the time. And this is like equally perhaps creepy to other people, but I would, you always have your gun with you, but you have it near you, and you think more often about pulling it out or having your hand on the butt of the gun to pull it out, things like that. I would think about that and run those scenarios in movie theaters, in restaurants. I would go to the Kennedy Center and I would, with a gun in my purse, maybe because it's not on my hip because I'm in a dress. And I would be thinking with that purse right in my lap. I didn't set it down next to me or beside me. I keep it in my lap with the idea that, well, there's the door. And if somebody comes through the door, I mean, I run those scenarios all the time in my head, sleeping and awake. I don't know. I just always wanted to be prepared just in case.
Yeah. I don't know how good that makes me feel to know that you feel the same way.
It's a job that seems to have literally changed the fiber of your being. You
absolutely
cannot turn off at all.
Yeah. And
No.
I know that there are some agents who argue about this saying, but the saying is that being an agent is not what you do, but who you are. I believe that in many ways. My husband is always saying to me, I thought you retired, but having lived that life for 26 years, it's very difficult to get out of that mindset.
I think because it's not a 8-hour a day job. I mean, agents have to work 10 hours a day minimum, 10 hours a day minimum as part of their job. So that's 50 hours a week. And it would be really nice to just work 50 hours a week. I don't know about you, but I never felt like I was working 50 hours a week, and you're taking calls at home. And my mom, God rest her soul, I would be in Michigan visiting family. I'd be at my mom's house, and my phone would ring, and my mom would say, back in the old days, my pager would ring, and I'd have to make a long distance call back to the office. And my mom would say, "Don't they know that you're visiting family?" I'm like, "No, Mom, it's a 24-hour day job. Doesn't matter if it's
and they
Saturday,
may know,
Sunday,
but they don't
whatever."
care.
That's right. I'm like, "No, Mom, it's a full-time job, and that means 24/7. It's holidays, Christmas Day, you're taking calls from the office." So yeah, it's just kind of part of the job. It is a life, not a 8-hour job. I would love our audience to hear the sound of the voices of people who have been in that position and feel the weight on their shoulders.
Which one do you want to do next?
What do you think?
Well, let's do it. Ed Morales. I mean, he's a legendary FBI hero of the Miami shooting, which occurred in April of 1986. I know that well because my classmate, Jerry Dove, was one of the agents shot. And I remember hearing that there was a shoot.
I didn't know that you were classmates with Jerry. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember being in the office in Philadelphia and everybody's running around. There's been a shooting, a shootout in Miami. And me just thinking, I hope it's not Jerry. I mean, we were really close. We were the Jerrys. I went to Sacramento as my first office. He was in San Diego. My sister and I got to go down and have some drinks with him. And even when he was transferred to Miami and I was in Philadelphia, we still talked on the phone a little bit. Yeah, he was just a great guy with that great West Virginia accent. And we just got along really well. And I remember hearing the name and going to the bathroom because I did not want people to see my reaction. And I was devastated because you always saw these, I don't want to make this about me, but you saw all the time the pictures of the scene with the sheets over the body. They were out there for, it seemed like hours. And then we were doing all this training and we were made to watch it over and over again. And yeah, it was just, so when I talked to Ed, and it's actually a 2-part episode, I think like 3 hours, each one an hour and a half or more long. It was just really emotional. But Ed has had to tell this story and relive this over and over again. And I really appreciate that his understanding of how important it is for people to hear his story and to hear what he has to say. So yeah, let's hear his clip.
So before the clip, let me set it up a little bit, if that helps. Jerri, I did not realize that you were classmates with Jerry. So I know this is difficult to have, and I appreciate you having this discussion. When we talk about the Miami shootout, it's very significant for the FBI because we changed the entire training protocol for the FBI after this shooting, completely changed the training. And Ed Morales not only was involved in this shooting, but he came to Quantico and then he taught new agents about firefights and shooting and protocols. But what occurred is there were agents and law enforcement locally. They were surveilling somebody. And Jerri, jump in here if I get this wrong, because I'm just going to be very general. But they were surveilling somebody who was in a car, a couple of guys in a car. And it got to a point where they were kind of running parallel to them on some roads and they were around them. But they got to a point where they were going to stop this car. And when they tried to stop the car, and they kind of surrounded the car with their cars and other law enforcement, the people inside the car started shooting. And there were a lot of things, like, just for example, one of the things that I learned at the academy this was such a pivotal time for the FBI that they recreated the entire shooting incident in a film, and they showed and discussed in the film for FBI training personnel, people who are training, the things that, we could have done better, or the circumstances that you might find yourself in, like an agent who had lost his glasses and how that impacted his ability to shoot. And I may not have all the facts right, but these are some of the facts that I recall. And the firefight took the lives of 2 agents,
Ben Grogan and
Jerri Dove.
Mhm.
And there were other officers shot. So it was a massive firefight. And Ed Morales is one of the people who I think ended up essentially ending the incident. I guess I'll say it that way. Stopping the threat. Because I know before I said casually, we shoot to kill, but we have to recognize that to stop the threat may mean that you're going to kill somebody. You have to understand that about deadly force. So Eddie Morales put in a position and had to make decisions, and that's what this clip is about.
Ben is yelling, "Police, FBI, don't move." They're giving orders, okay? Jerri had placed the little blue light, flashing light, had placed it on the dash. So the light is flashing, they're giving instructions, and the response was boom, boom, boom. That broke the silence, because before I even exited my car, I heard the gunshots.
There were other officers injured and wounded, and that firefight lasted more time. I don't know what the time was, but exactly, but longer than most shooting exchanges between law enforcement and individuals. And I think that Ed had been hit.
Yeah, he had been hit
in the shoulder, in the left shoulder.
Yeah, and also in the forehead, which just
grazing,
grazed
like
him.
a grazing. Yeah.
But it was a head wound, and so there was so much blood, that it affected his vision. But yeah, he had serious, arm injuries.
And he explains it in the podcast. So please go to Jerri's podcast, these 2 episodes, and listen if you want the details on it. But he was able to use the force of his body and leaning a pump action shotgun on the ground in order to be able to load it. That takes 2 hands. And when you only have 1 hand, you got to improvise. And that's what he had to do in order to lean it against himself and his body and in the ground, and try to load rounds into that shotgun in order to end the threat. And he was able to do that. And only then could they go to see whether or not they could help people who were injured and help them survive.
Yeah, and he was able to shoot and kill the subjects in order to end the firefight. This incident, and again, I'm talking about me, but it was 4 years into my career, and it definitely affected me. Jerri's funeral in West Virginia was the first line of duty funeral that I ever went to, and it really set the tone for me about what this job meant. Even if I wasn't working violent crime or terrorism or, being involved in a situation where this is daily for me. I was doing frauds and white collar crime. This Miami shootout incident was what, for me and for most of the agents in the Bureau at that time, really got a good understanding of what this job really means, as far as keeping yourself safe and saving the life of others and your law enforcement partners.
When you talk about gravity of things, and law enforcement being prepared. I worked in the Washington field office of the FBI. And before I got there in 94, Martha Dixon Martinez was killed. She was an FBI agent who was simply working in the police department offices with other police officers when somebody came into the DC police station, walked in and started shooting at people. And Martha Dixon Martinez had been married not too long before. And she's an agent working in the Washington field office, killed, her gun and purse were in the next room. That happened in 94. I became an agent in 97. I knew about that and how I saw the visuals of where she was and where her purse was, where the gun was. And that's why my entire career, I wore that gun on my hip, because I always had this image of how they knew she tried to get to her gun and she couldn't get to it. She was killed.
I wanted to add, because there were 2 others killed in that incident, so I wanted to make
Yes,
sure that
please.
we acknowledged them. And it was Mike Miller, who was another agent out of the DC office, and Police Sergeant Hank Daly. They were also killed. They were working together on a violent crime task force. They had office space right there in the Washington, D.C. police headquarters. And somebody came in with a gripe against a totally different detective. And he got
Right.
turned around and went into the wrong room. And once he got in there, he started shooting. And those 3 individuals were shot and killed. John Kuchek, who was also part of that, survived. He was shot 4 or 5 times, almost fatally, and he pulled through. But I was able to talk to him in episode 267, and it was the first time he had ever participated in a recording. He'd gone and spoken to law enforcement officers as part of training, but this was the first time that he spoke to someone like me to address the public. And let me back up for a little bit to say that I did a whole episode on Martha Dixon for Women's History Month in 2022 because it was the 50th anniversary of women in the FBI. And I thought that'd be a great way to acknowledge women FBI agents, was to do an episode with Martha. And I spoke to everyone that worked with her, including John Kucha, who was in the fire part with her. And I spoke to her sister and her brother about how it affected their family. And so that's episode 266. And then I followed that with the episode with John talking about the incident, which is episode 267. So let's play that, I guess.
And now I'm up on my feet. I'm firing at him. He's firing at me. And we're like feet apart. And I'm getting hit. I'm getting hit in the upper chest. I could feel it. Initially, the bullets were burning, but it wasn't like they hurt. It was the acrid, pungent smell of, I guess, gunpowder, like you're at the range. At that moment, the bullets hit my femur, my upper leg. That was when I felt excruciating pain.
I can't imagine.
I just can't. I just can't.
A femur puts you down. I mean, one of the things that we learn in training, if you hit a femur, that person's not going to keep moving.
And if you have a chance to listen to the entire episode, his entire look at what happened and how sudden it was and unexpected. I mean, they're in the office just working on office stuff, whether it's, filling out a report or typing out your interviews, just a regular day. And somebody comes in and this happens. And his ability to react is amazing.
I think it's a frightening reality that law enforcement kind of thinks about all the time, and then we try to put it away because it's part of the job every day. And every day you think you can't do your job every day if you're worried all the time that you're going to get killed or kill somebody. It's like saying that, a car is a deadly object. And when you go out to drive your car, you just drive your car. But if you really think about it, you could kill pedestrians, you could kill drivers in other cars, and you could be killed very easily if somebody hits your car. But if you let that overwhelm you, you'd never get in a car. And that's what it's like for agents and officers who go outside every day with their weapons on their hips.
Yeah, but we're not dreaming about car accidents at night, are we? I mean, like the
Look what our
actual,
confession did.
yeah,
You know what?
confession
I think
corner.
that's because I think we dream about it because I think we feel, I mean, at least for me, I don't want to speak for you, Jerry, but I think I feel such a sense of responsibility as an FBI agent. I felt such a huge sense of responsibility to do my job well all the time. And if I didn't, I mean, how could I explain that I didn't do my job well?
Some heavy consequences of a bad day at work.
Yeah. Perhaps that's true. That's true.
I do have one more that I did want to run. I think this is a good one because I interviewed 2 agents. It was a Philadelphia gunfight. I was, in the Philadelphia office at the time, and I really wanted to interview the 2 agents who were involved in the gunfight on the podcast, and I was able to do that. It was a situation where they heard, again, talking about the responsibility of we understand for people who work with us. And they had gotten a call from one of their informants that he had been wrangled into getting into a car to go out to find someone to kill.
Never get in a car. Never get in a car.
So he before he got in the car, he called to let the agents who he was working with, his handling agents, know they're getting ready to go out and kill this guy. And of course, as law enforcement officers, we can care less what this person has done or who they are. The knowledge that someone is about to be killed, we have to act on that. And so the agents who are in the office get in their cars to try to get to the location or to get these guys to stop their car before they can get to where they're going. So they can stop them. They will not go to do this hit. And so this situation occurs when they stop the car and the people in the car decide they don't want to be stopped and they start shooting. Okay, so we're going to hear from both Jim Sweeney and Rich Macco. It's episode 161, and again, it's the Broad Street shootout.
I'm located to the rear of the target car on the driver's side. And the first thing I see is the rear window, which is tinted, goes gray. And in the lower right corner, I see there's a hole and I see puffs of smoke coming at it. And that's when it first dawned on me that they're shooting at us. I don't know if it was Rich or somebody yelled, they're shooting. At that point is when all hell broke loose and we started firing. We eventually fired 41 shots into the car. All 3 bad guys were hit. The informant was not hit, not scratched at all.
After I fired my 3rd round, I felt a stinging sensation in my throat. I put my hand up to my throat to feel it and pulled it away and was covered in blood. I turned it around and freaked out a little because the whole thing was covered in blood, as if I put it into a bucket of paint and pulled it out. And then I observed that I was no longer standing, that I was actually on the ground.
Sarah, what do you think about that? I see your eyes are wide.
It's the speed of these decisions that have to be made. And I don't think you can really appreciate it until you hear it from the words of someone who's been there, is the decisions that they're making, and that, like, oh, someone's shooting, but it's almost like that. You can almost hear him with the cogs whirring going, oh, yes, we're being shot at. But you know that that's happening in like seconds. And I think it's incredible. I don't know. I've said this to a friend who's a doctor before. And I think the same of law enforcement. It's a superpower that you guys can't put down because you've been given this training and, you can't step away from it because you feel responsible. And that's what's coming through here today. So thank you for all of your training and for sticking with it, because I think it's incredible. Was there any times during your careers that you were like, hands up, I should have been doing something a lot less stressful as a job?
No.
Never for me.
No.
I think you take that responsibility. When you listen to that clip, You can hear. I agree with you, Sarah. The wheels are rolling in his head. They're doing the analysis about what is happening. And imagine they recognize that they have an innocent source in the car. I mean, they have an unarmed source and they're shooting into the car. A lot of times people say, well, the police shot all those rounds. And that's because your job is to end the threat. End the threat. Somebody's shooting at you, end the threat. Do you shoot twice and then you wait and see if the threat is over? I think that's a hard reality that when people talk about how much force did law enforcement use? Oh, they fired 20 rounds.
He
That's
emptied
because
he emptied his entire magazine. Yeah, because
right, because you don't fire one at a time and then see if the threat is still chasing you, coming after you, because the person on the other side is still firing at you. They're not counting any rounds. They're emptying every round they have from their weapon. And that's the reality of you have to fire until you're confident that threat is over. Could you have fired 5 rounds? And did that first round go through his heart and stop him? Maybe it did. Maybe it hit his calf. You don't know. I remember reading that shoot review and thinking to myself, as I was reading through it, I remember thinking, there's no way that this guy survived. There's no way their source survived. No way. And their source was unhit. He was sitting in the middle of the car, I recall, middle of the back seat, I think, which makes it even more amazing.
Well, hold on. He was sitting in the middle of the back seat.
I believe he was.
He got down. I remember them saying on the episode that he got down and almost like as in the car bottom and like he could almost wedge himself under the seat. He knew to keep down low, and he was safe.
That was amazing. I was so happy to read that he survived.
Yeah, just all of these agents who were able to recount these moments. It's just amazing. And I just appreciate their willingness to share, so that this is institutional knowledge, to share what happened to them, so that if we're ever in a situation, we may be able to use what they did to be able to talk about it today in order to keep ourselves safe.
And I would say, and to keep civilians safe, because here's one of the things that we learned from the Miami shooting, part of the redesign of training. The law enforcement officers moved their cars to pin the other car, essentially, where these 2 guys were inside the car. And the law enforcement officers moved closer. And one of the things that they took away from that Miami shooting was that we don't need to be that close. So we can park further away and we can yell to them and say, hey, get out of your car. And that was a safety factor, not only, for law enforcement, but a safety factor for them too.
So when I was asked to be on the show, I again wanted to talk about something relevant. And I had listened to your next episode, which was about the Kansas City parade. And you said a few things there that really made me think, this is what we need to talk about, the importance of deadly force. But I wanted to bring up the fact that it even hit more recently, because I'm not living in the Philadelphia area anymore. I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to be close to the grandkids. And my husband has become a season ticket holder with the NC State women's team. And so on Monday, both the men's and the women's team this year got to the Final Four basketball. And so, yay. And so Monday was the parade, the Final Four parade at NC State on the campus. And as my husband left to go to the parade, it was in the evening, I said to him, don't get shot. And it was a flippant remark, but I didn't feel good until he got home, because of the situation in Kansas City, of the situation that happens when there are large crowds around in this country. And so what you said in your show that made me think about, we need to talk about what trained officers go through, really hits home. So cue the clip.
when you think about taking a gun someplace, you may have a legal right to carry the gun. You may not necessarily have the right to fire that gun. And when you fire a gun in public, you run the risk of hurting people. People are not as good with a firearm as they think they are. I mean, law enforcement that trains all the time only hits their mark so many times. It's kind of like baseball averages when the adrenaline is going and the person is running and moving. And every round you discharge from a weapon is going someplace until something stops it. And in a crowded area, that someplace could just as easily be an individual. So be circumspect about bringing a gun to the fight, because when you bring a gun, you add to the problem. Because if you draw a gun and you fire, you could be the one who's being arrested because you killed an innocent person, and you will have to live with that. So don't bring a gun to the gunfight unless you need to.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. I mean, when I heard that, I was like, this is it. We need to discuss this. For those of us who decide to carry a gun, and again, that's all right. You need to think about this. Law enforcement's thinking about it all the time, even in our dreams.
Dreaming about it.
Dreaming about it. So if you are a private citizen and you want to do this, then you need to start adopting this mindset, in my opinion.
No, I absolutely agree. Obviously, in that episode, we talked about it at length, and so I won't go on about it here. But I think that listening to what Jerri brought to the show today, you get an opportunity to hear the gravity and the impact and how it affects you from your life and your career, but also in your personal life. And that's just the reality of people who carry a gun all the time. We live in a country now where there are more guns than people. The weapons are out there, and action is faster than reaction. If the law enforcement officer believes that there is an imminent threat, if they have a reasonable belief that there is an imminent threat, a danger to themselves or others, they have a legal right under their training and the laws to use their weapon to end that threat. But you as a civilian do not. If you as a civilian shoot, you will be involved in legal actions, and you will pay thousands and thousands of dollars for legal representation, even if you did nothing wrong. And I say that as a lawyer. That is part of the reality of the legal system that we live in. And so it's okay if you carry a gun, but you better get the gravity of what it's like to carry a gun. And I'll just add this sentence. There is no data that says that good guy with a gun works. We would like to think there might be data. There isn't. So stop saying good guy with a gun is the solution to every mass shooting or active shooter. It isn't, because there's no data to support it. Maybe someday there will be, but for 25 years of data, there isn't. So I get you want to carry a gun to protect yourself and your family. You absolutely have a right to do that, but you will be judged on some of the same standards that law enforcement is judged on. Do we reasonably believe, does a jury reasonably believe that you were in imminent danger? Not afraid, imminent danger for yourselves or others. And I would just add that one of the saddest cases that I studied when I was with the FBI and working on their research was two civilians, one who was carrying, they were in a grocery store. There was a shooter who came into Walmart who had shot police officers and killed them at the location right nearby. And then they fled that location. That shooter came into Walmart and went back towards where the Walmart was carrying weapons and ammunition. The two men who were at the kind of the refund aisle, the customer service counter, they left the store, and then one of them who was carrying said, I'm going to go back in and take care of this. And he went back into the store and he followed the shooter. And what he didn't know is that shooter's wife was also a shooter, and she was right behind him. And she lifted her gun and popped him in the head and killed him. You don't know the circumstances. You're not trained to do what law enforcement is trained to do. Think about that before you carry a gun. And most importantly, think about that before you choose to pull a gun out of a holster.
You really said everything that I would say. But the most important thing is also when you think about the consequences, think about the responsibility. And if you are going to carry a gun, make sure you keep up with your training.
Yes.
Just because you bought a gun and then you took a course, 3 years ago is not adequate. It is not responsible. Law enforcement and the FBI 4 times a year, we are responsible to go to firearms training and to qualify.
And you shoot more often than that, but that's just to
yes.
qualify. Every
That's
quarter, just to qualify.
Mm-hmm. And so as a gun owner who is going to be carrying their gun and making those split-second situations, your brain will be able to adapt to those situations better if you are training on a regular basis.
And I want to add one thing about civilians. Jerri mentioned before that she chose not to carry as much off duty as I chose to carry on duty. I had conversations with my kids to say, if this gun comes out of the holster, you cannot be anywhere near me. Because if somebody is firing a gun at me, you could be hit. So when you're out with your family and you're out with your friends and you're carrying a gun, recognize that if somebody is shooting back at you, they're going to possibly kill the people who you love the most, who you're with.
You just a
Wow.
bloody box of fluffies
Yeah,
today.
that's
Schweit.
that is real talk, real truth. And I think if nothing else hits home for somebody who is out there and has made the decision to carry a gun, that's the thing that they need to think about the most. Who are you with? Who's with you? And how are those consequences going to blow back on your loved ones, your friends, your family? Wow. When I wrote back and suggested this, I had no idea how, what's the word? I don't know what the word I want to use. Powerful just seems like a cliche, but my hands are clammy and cold and clammy, and I'm just thinking about this show and how we may have saved someone's life or other people's lives by giving them this opportunity to hear the realities of what it's like to take a life or to have your life taken in a gun situation.
That's why we're so grateful that you were here today, Jerri. And so can you tell our listeners how they can find you and where they can find you and all things Jerri?
Yeah, thank you. So jerriwilliams.com is my website. And on there, you can access my podcast. Most importantly, the show notes where I have lots of resources and news articles about the cases that I talk about. You can also check out my books. My bestseller is FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, where
It's a great book.
Yeah, thank you. Where I go through 20 cliches about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. I also blog about TV shows and movies and look for teachable moments about FBI policies and procedures. The last one I did was Twin Peaks, which I thought was really interesting because it's an old show. I went back old school.
Classic.
But yeah. So everything about Jerri Williams and the things that I've been doing for the last almost 8.5 years, you'll find at jerriwilliams.com. And of course, the podcast, FBI Retired, Case File Review, is available wherever you get your podcast. And I even got to interview, I'm very proud of this, so I'm going to brag a little bit, for my 300th episode, FBI Director Christopher Wray. He has done no other podcast, but he did mine. And
I saw that. Wow.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
That was a mic drop moment. Yeah,
that is a mic drop moment. And for those of you who are listening who will wonder, it's JerriWilliams.com.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more, Katherine's book, Stop the Killing, is out now. For more details, go to katherineschweit.com. Please consider also supporting our independently made podcast. It's simple to do. Go to patreon.com/Stop the Killing. And for as little as the price of a latte a month, you can be part of the solution to stop the killing. Patreon rewards range from official do-gooder status to ad-free episodes, autographed books, and opportunities to connect with us directly for your business, school, church, or even just a book club chat. But just knowing that you are part of a movement that has the power to make your community safer, well, that's got to taste better than a skinny cappuccino any day. So please head to patreon.com/Stop the Killing now and polish off your do-gooder halo and make sure to include your name so we can give you a shout out. This podcast is a community podcast production. That's con with an N. If you want more content, then head over to Community Podcast at Instagram, where you'll find trailers on more binge-worthy true crime, like the award-winning podcast Conning the Con. And check out our show notes for all the links mentioned. Finally, if you want one takeaway action that you can do right now that can help make our community safer, please share, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Everybody needs to know that they hold the keys to see something and say something. Together, we can stop the killing.
It's one of those things you hope never happens, but you better train for it, because it will happen, and it will happen in places you wouldn't expect. Be ready for it.